because there is no other answer than the one Joseph gave as its young, unlearned translator.
Well, sure there are. You just unwittingly listed 4 of them, and there are more than that. Just because you don't believe in them doesn't mean that they're not valid explanations. If the Book of Mormon matched what the archaeological and DNA evidence tells us about the life of origin of the Native Americans, I could agree with Holland. If it contained facts that were not known and could not be known by anyone in Joseph's day, then his explanation would be very hard to dismiss. Instead, the book describes things that are contrary to what scientific evidence tells us about the Native Americans and contains numerous anachronisms about their society and their life. To present it as a literal historical fact, despite it not containing any verifiable history and being counter to what we do know, and not accepting any other explanation, is frankly pathetic.
In this I stand with my own great-grandfather, who said simply enough, "No wicked man could write such a book as this, and no good man would write it, unless it were true, and he were commanded of God to do so."
Now, others make very similar claims when defending their sacred texts. This would include the Quran, the Bible, the Book of the Law of the Lord, the Bhagavad Gita, the Urantia book, the Hindu Vedas, etc. You can go on and on with all the different religious texts that are out there. Now, while I do not doubt Elder Holland's sincerity or that of his grandfather, but their declarations are simply their opinions, and those are as prone to human error and bias as anybody else's is.
I testify that one cannot come to full faith in this latter-day work and thereby find the fullest measure of peace and comfort in these our times until he or she embraces the divinity of the Book of Mormon and the Lord Jesus Christ of whom it testifies.
Holland is again bringing up the dichotomy of Mormonism, which is an all-or-nothing dichotomy here, by saying that a person cannot be a member in the fullest measure, come to faith in the fullest measure, or find peace and comfort if they do not accept the divinity of the Book of Mormon. It doesn't say Jesus first, he says Book of Mormon. This is insulting to those who struggle to accept the official stories, or have difficulty integrating or ignoring the contrary evidence. Yet they want to remain in the church. Their family's in the church, they like being in the church, they want to be considered a member in the fullest measure. Now, how are they supposed to do that without feeling or being treated like they are second-class members until they conform and believe what they've been told they're supposed to believe?
If anyone is foolish enough or misled enough to reject 531 pages of a heretofore unknown text.
Now, going back to what I said before, a great many people outside of Mormonism and organized religion in general have found peace, comfort, and great faith, for lack of a better term. There are many true believing members who struggle with depression and stress. Utah is at the top of the list when it comes to antidepressant use. Holland's statement that only believing in the Book of Mormon brings a fullness of peace and faith does not match up with reality. It's a very divisive thing to say, especially when you then go on to call people foolish and misled for not accepting the divinity of the Book of Mormon. This is a propaganda ploy and has no effect on the truthfulness or the falseness of anyone's position. It just denigrates those who have a different opinion than you do.
Teeming with literary and Semitic complexity, without honestly attempting to account for the origin of those pages somehow.
Did Elder Holland just forget what he previously said? I mean, he just called all naturalistic theories that attempt to account for the origin of the Book of Mormon frankly pathetic, failed, and dead, and labeled anyone who accepts or investigates them as being foolish and misled. And after he does all that, Holland demands that people who reject the divine origin of the Book of Mormon must find some way to account for it. How are they supposed to do that? You just eliminated all other options, all other ways of explaining it, and left only one. It seems that Elder Holland is just manipulating the audience so that they only have the option in Mormonism to accept the official Orthodox story. He also implies that anyone who does not accept the divinity of the Book of Mormon and creates or attempts to create some other type of theory, that they are being dishonest.
Especially without accounting for their powerful witness of Jesus Christ and the profound spiritual impact that witness has had on what is now tens of millions of readers. If that's the case, then such persons, elect or otherwise, have been deceived.
With much passion and conviction, Elder Holland, without presenting any real evidence, labels anyone who honestly holds the view that the Book of Mormon's origins are not exactly what the church says they are, that those persons are deceived. He's basically saying that if you don't believe the story the way that he believes the story, then you are wrong, and you will continue to be until you agree with him. This is a very arrogant accusation for him to make. But it does point out what happens if you disagree with the Orthodox view within the Mormon Church. It will be your fault. It's never the church's fault. You never have a point. There's never a problem with the history. It is always your fault, and you need to change, and you need to conform.
And if they leave this church, they must do so by crawling over or under or around the Book of Mormon to make their exit. In that sense, the book is what Christ himself was said to be: a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, a barrier in the path of one who wishes not to believe in this work.
So this idea that the Book of Mormon is a barrier to those who wish not to believe is very unfair to those who struggle with their testimony. It suggests that when anybody ever leaves the church, it is only because they do not want to believe in it. This is not the case. I know dozens of people that have tried to find a way to stay in the church or explain away their doubts about the Book of Mormon before they left. The Book of Mormon is often the last thing they cling to in an attempt to save their testimony. It's not uncommon for the doubting member to buckle down and reread it after a trial of their faith in an attempt to rekindle that faith. Sometimes this works, but other times this renewed study leads them to learn things that lead them out of the church, and they end up leaving through the Book of Mormon. Some people have a hard time with the contradictions between the teachings contained in the Book of Mormon, which is supposed to contain the fullness of the gospel, and what is actually taught in the church. Some people have difficulty with the book because of the anachronisms it contains. Some doubt the historicity of the text because it conflicts with what we know about the Native Americans through archaeology, anthropology, and DNA analysis. Many people have a problem with the origin story itself, which says that Joseph Smith looked into a hat, and he put his peepstone in the hat, and he would stare at the peepstone, and he would see the words of the text of the Book of Mormon, and he would dictate them to Oliver Cowdery, and the golden plates were not used in that process. This is not made up. The church has even published that this has happened. I believe the July 1993 Ensign has an article by Elder Nelson where he says this. Now, if you want to have a rock of stumbling to those who don't want to believe, saying that the Book of Mormon the text of the Book of Mormon was received while Joseph Smith stared at magic rocks in the bottom of the hat, that's a pretty big stumbling rock to a lot of people. And to say that the only way someone would not believe that story is if they wanted to leave the church is insulting. Now, Elder Holland does not want to acknowledge any of the weaknesses in the book, the story, the church, so he paints all those who no longer find that they can believe as simply not wanting to. It's always their fault.